Welcome to Purdue Westgate's First Tuesday. So I know I recognize a lot of you, so I appreciate y'all coming back. We always try to bring everybody together from a small business, industry, academia, government, defense perspective to just kind of share knowledge, converge with each other, learn about what's happening throughout the tech park, the region, and even the state. So we appreciate you coming and cannot wait to continue this when we go network. So a lot of people may not see the connection between national security and food, but when large-scale threats affect food and agriculture supplies, they become matters of national security. Access to food and national security are tightly connected. There is a clear connection between hunger, war, and peace. Bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas are for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. Today's presenter, Mitch Frazier, serves as Chief Executive Officer of Agrinovus, Indiana. Agrinovus is a nonprofit focused on growing the ag tech and ag bioscience economy. Prior to Agrinovus, Mitch served as Chief Executive Officer of regional John Deere retailer Reynolds Farm Equipment, where he led the 250-person organization to be named among the top performing John Deere dealers in North America. He's going to be presenting today on Agbioscience, the cornerstone of national security. So just as a reminder, we are going to record this, and there will be copies of the slides and the recording be sent to you if you have RSVP'd. If you haven't RSVP'd or registered for this and want those slides recording, please let myself or my colleague Morgan Tavis back there know when we can add you to the list. Or if you want to be added to the distribution list that we send out on a regular basis, please let us know that as well. So with no further ado, I'd like to have Mitch come up here and do his presentation.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, here we go. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is just an absolute delight to be here. I was sharing with the team, this is my first time at Crane in 20 years. And so to see what has happened over the last 20 years is nothing short of extraordinary. And as a guy who spent some time active duty in the Army and spent some time working for the Army as a civilian in Iraq and down in New Orleans following Katrina, it's just a delight to be with Americans who share a similar passion and unified around this idea of how to protect and defend this great experiment that we're all a part of, that we call America. And so today my goal is pretty simple. It's to help paint a picture for maybe what is possible, how it is that this world of ag bioscience, of ag, is connected to national security. And I think there's an opportunity here to even broaden perspective on what is ag and how we think about ag. In fact, I believe as we talk about ag, we actually talk about food. And food is the cornerstone of national security. Today we're going to take a look at what that actually means. What does food mean in the context of national security? We'll take a look at some history. And I'll share with you three things. Three things that I believe collectively in this room, our colleagues can do to advance this idea to secure our future as it relates to food security and national security. Now the great news is this conversation around food security and national security has been one that has been in the making for quite some time. In fact, we go back to 2018. Maybe after he was Lieutenant Young, and he was Senator Young here in 2018, he's actually testifying in a Senate subcommittee. And our senior senator from Indiana is part of a committee hearing on why food security matters. What I love about Todd's story is he's talking about why this matters to the future of the U.S. And Senator Young is recounting a conversation he had with a Marine general. I won't hold it against him that was a Marine. But Todd's saying, hey, I remember this conversation, and he put it so brilliantly. What the Marine general said was food crises grow terrorists. And if you begin to think through what all of us would do, I'm a dad of a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, two beautiful little girls. I think they're the cutest kids on the planet. But those two little girls, if I couldn't feed them, there's probably not anything I wouldn't do to make sure they could eat. You begin to put that in the context of war, and you begin to put that in the context of national security, you can begin to see this connection. And we're seeing it right now in places like Sudan. This is a picture from AFP, a story they wrote earlier this year, and AFP is talking with this farmer who's a 43-year-old farmer, hasn't been to his field since November. Can't get there. The country is in turmoil. The country is in war. And what we hear from this farmer is not just that he can't get to his field, massive challenge. He actually can't sell the crop that's in the field, which then disrupts the economy. And the food that he would normally, the crop that he would normally harvest can't actually become food. You begin to see that using food as a weapon of war isn't just starving people, it's actually breaking down the economy that surrounds food. This isn't necessarily a new idea in warfare. We've seen it, look at World War I. This is from 1941. And the Nazis. The Nazis actually implemented a plan called the Hunger Plan, where they took rations from populations. Genocide. 7 million people died. 7 million people died as part of the Hunger Plan that the Nazis implemented, using food as a weapon of war. Not just to, again, to disrupt an economy, and not just to starve people, but to actually suppress a portion of the population. We see it in Sudan. We've seen it abroad in World War I, and we see it today in current conflict. You may remember this is Odessa in Ukraine. This August last year, if you remember, when Russia bombed the Odessa port. And you begin to put all this into perspective. So Odessa is the seagoing port in Ukraine. And for those that maybe aren't familiar, Ukraine is really the breadbasket of the region. Food exports are a massive part of the economy. So what did Russia do? They bombed the port. They collapsed the ability for Ukraine to export food. They broke the economy. In the wake of that economy being broken, what they found was they actually starved people downfield. You begin to see that this idea of the weapon of war that is food is real, and it's been part of our history. Now, when you look at that, you begin to think through things like this, where we see Odessa, and you think grain. Here in Indiana, look out the field and see, or look out the window and see fields. Cornfields, bean fields, and I think that's what most people think of when they think of ag. They think of agriculture. I think this is a bigger story than just agriculture. When we talk about ag, we talk about Agbioscience. We talk about this in the context of the Indiana economy, and I want to walk you through what's here because I think this is important as we get into how those three things are that we can go collectively do to ensure that national security and food security are one and the same. So we first think about value-added food and nutrition. This is anything from the farm gate to the dinner plate, where it's food manufacturing, it's ingredient development, it's something that isn't a commodity. For context, just that piece alone of these 5 subverticals, just the food piece alone is a $30 billion economy in our state. We look at animal health and nutrition. So this is anything from vaccine to feed. How do we feed animals? How do we care for animals? How do we make sure that we are producing them sustainably? And when I mean sustainably, I mean economically. It's actually possible to generate net income off of them. But also, how do we do that ecologically? It's animal health and nutrition. The large player here in Indiana is Elanco, big globally held company. For those that don't know, Elanco is now the second largest independent animal health company in the world. They're headquartered here in Indiana. Pretty cool. Plant science and crop protection. This is seed genetics. So think of seed genetics. How do we innovate at the genetic level of the seed for drought tolerance, for wind resistance, extreme weather events? How do we do that? And then how do we care for that plant as it becomes a crop that's harvestable? Biologicals are a big piece of this. How do we use the power of nature to actually care for crops and protect crops along the way? The big juggernaut here in Indiana is Corteva. We'll talk more about Corteva as we look at what's possible in the future, but holy cow, we are blessed with a tremendous amount of resources on the plant science front. Ag tech, this is hardware and software. So everything from my propensity to love everything green and yellow, John Deere tractors, to software companies that are innovating in this space to where those things come together. We've seen a lot of great strength in this space here. For those that don't know, the software industry in Indiana, of which I think I'm a graduate, maybe some would say defector, but a graduate of some sort of part of the team that took a tech company called ExactTarget public back in 2012. But the tech economy in Indiana is one that is a massive benefit to national security. I don't think we often talk about this. Is not necessarily directly related to Agbioscience, but just contextually. You know, Indiana's tech economy has seen $8 billion of tech transactions over the last decade-ish. ExactTarget, company I was a part of, acquired by Salesforce for $2.5 billion. Oracle's made moves here. SAP has made moves here. Microsoft has bought companies here. Teradata has bought a company here. All the big companies have made moves here. When you look at all of that strength, all of the innovators that have gone into that, there's a huge opportunity for us to link that talent to problems like this, to problems in national security. A huge opportunity. And the great thing about much of that talent, generation or two away from the farm, generation or two away from rural economies. And lastly is production agriculture. This is when people talk ag, this is what they typically think of, right? They think of corn and beans and pigs, all really important. And in fact, what I would argue is you can't have the other four without this one. In fact, we heard it when Corteva moved their global headquarters to Indianapolis back in 2022. Their CEO, Chuck Magro, said, the reason why we're putting our headquarters in Indiana is we want to be close to our customer. Customers are farmers. And so you begin to look at the opportunity that's here, and you say, boy, the assets that we have on the balance sheet of Indiana are absolutely extraordinary. Let me put some numbers behind this. This economy here, the entire segment, this Agbioscience economy, it's a $58 billion economy in our state. $58 billion. Let me go further. This economy directly employs 155,000 people. Now, I'm not an economist, don't play one on TV, but I would tell you the way the economists describe total economic impact of an economy like this is they look at direct, indirect, and induced. And sort of all the ways in which people and jobs connect to an economy. This economy connected roughly 10% of Indiana's workforce. 10%. Roughly 325,000 jobs somehow connected to here. So I think we get the idea this is a big economy. It's Agbioscience economy. It's broad, it's diverse, it's everything from food to tech to production agriculture. It's science. We've made it pretty clear, history has shown us that food can be used as a weapon of war. I would argue that food is the only economy in the world that touches every person on the planet. So if we believe all those things to be true, we realize we have a lot of work to get done. We have to make sure that this economy is an economy that is resilient, it's an economy that has staying power, and it's one that is not susceptible to risk as it relates to national security. So I want to share with you three things that I believe this room, our colleagues, our friends, businesses in this space can go do. First, we have to accelerate resiliency. And when I mean resiliency, I want to be really clear here. We have to be able to create a system that can withstand the shocks that are part of the economy. We have to be able to withstand shocks like we have seen in times of national challenge and in times of global challenge. Now, the great news is there are companies like the one that you see before you. This is the CTO, Chief Technology Officer for Corteva. I mentioned them earlier, Sam Eddington. Sam, great guy. Just a couple weeks ago, Sam launched a new program that to me is the perfect example of model, a blueprint that all of us could follow. What Sam said is, hey, look, we realize this resiliency piece is big. It's big to our business, but it's big to the global economy, it's big to our ability to actually feed people. That's really important. So what he said is we're going to create this program, they're going to call it Catalyst. They launched the Catalyst program. And Catalyst is, think, part venture funds, they're going to make direct investments, part collaboration network, part external innovation, and part sort of framework on how companies can work with Corteva. The beauty of this is it's ran out of the R&D team, not the corporate development team. So return, look, they're a publicly held company. In fact, this is a fun stat. So Corteva is the 4th largest publicly held company headquartered in our state. Bigger than Cummins. Now, you may not know Corteva, this may be net new to you, but if you've ever driven through the countryside and saw a Pioneer sign, that's Corteva. That's one of their brands. What I love about this, again, focused in R&D, not the primary driver of return, but also wildly focused. When Sam launched this, he said, look, we care about 4 things. We care about biological products. How do we use Mother Nature to do things that could be beneficial to the food system? We care about gene editing. How do we use the power of edits? I mean, imagine being able to edit a plant to have increased protein production, or to have tolerance for wind, or whatever variable may be there. Cared about decision science, so think machine learning. He cares about tech platforms. Think artificial intelligence. So they've created this framework because, again, resiliency matters, being able to withstand those shocks, particularly in an economy where, again, this is the only economy that touches every person on the planet. It's food. Not having this is simply not possible. We have to figure out how to do this. And when you look at why this is so important, you begin to look at things like this. This is from the International Monetary Fund. Let me orient you here. Last, call it 25 years here along the bottom, annual percent change in real GDP growth. Think of this. So red line is emerging markets, blue line is us, advanced markets, and that goldish brown color is sort of the amalgamation of the two. When you start to look at shocks, and you start to look at this economy we're operating within, you can see big shocks here, the financial crisis. You can look at the global pandemic. I mean, the global pandemic in food, like, friends, come on. This is, for the first time in my 44 years on the planet, I went to the grocery store and there weren't things on the shelf, right? We saw it firsthand, how shocks became part of this system. But here's the piece when we think about resiliency. These dotted lines out here to your right, real GDP growth is flat to declining everywhere. And so if you believe that there's this power of economic inertia, economic momentum, like it'll just solve itself, well, the forecast of the economy would say, we gotta do something different. We can't just rely on momentum carrying us through this, momentum solving the problem. And I think when we think about resiliency, I'm just reminded of a journalist, an author, Alfred Lewis. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Alfred Lewis. That's his picture. So right before, a couple years before his death, 1914, I think it was, he said something that to me puts this resiliency issue in perfect focus. Mankind is 9 meals away from anarchy. Begin to think about the example from Sudan. Begin to think about the example from Ukraine. Begin to think about the example, the hunger plan the Nazis implemented. 7 million people died. You begin to see this connection between food and national security is really clear. We have to accelerate resiliency. 2, we have to reduce dependency. Food is a global market. I've said it a couple times, I'll say it a couple more. Only economy in the world that touches every person on the planet. That means by definition, this is a global market. Food knows no boundaries, knows no geographies. It is part of a global economy, again, one we saw fragile during COVID. And so we've seen the federal government make moves here to reduce dependency. in certain sets of the economy. Most clearly, I think we've seen it in chips. We see it upstairs in microelectronics, where the federal government, through the Chips and Science Act, of which Senator Todd Young was a big proponent, created infrastructure to reshore and nearshore innovation, to reduce our dependency on foreign markets. What you see here is the tech hubs that came from the Chips and Science Act. There are 31 of them all across the US. The federal government making moves here to say, look, there are 10 key technology areas that we believe, well, they create over-reliance on foreign markets. Everything from autonomy to electrification. One that's near and dear to our hearts in food and Agbioscience is biotechnology. And so that blue dot that you see right there in Indiana is the biotechnology hub. It's called Heartland Bioworks. And so you can begin to see that there are movements happening here. And what I love about how the organizations that came together to make this biotech hub pursuit happen, well, they all realize this reality of food and national security. Because it's not just a biotech hub for human health, which when you say biotech, typically people think drugs, pharmaceuticals. This biotech hub focuses on the intersection between plants, animals, people, and the planet. You see, this reality is that the science that sits behind all of those, that's the great unlock. To reduce dependency on foreign markets, we have to use the power of science and innovation to actually make it happen. And when you begin to put this into context of what this actually means for the food system, holy cow, it becomes wildly clear this dependency is one that, well, it could be our Achilles heel. Everyone here has probably heard of Roundup, right? Well, the key ingredient in Roundup, the ingredient that actually makes it work, is glyphosate. 70% of glyphosate production in the world, maybe, comes from China. Oh, hold on. We're not going to restart now. We're not going to restart. Hold on. Remind me tomorrow. That would be great. All right. Now we're back. 70% of glyphosate production comes from China. Now here's why that matters in terms of the food system. Corn and soy. We're all pretty familiar. We talked about it. Roughly 50% of the acres of corn and soybeans in the US use glyphosate. Now, if you believe that corn and bean production is key to our national economy, I would agree with you. If you believe corn and bean production is critical to our ability to feed animals and feed our people, I would emphatically agree. You begin to think what happens when glyphosate no longer becomes available. The hit to yield on those corn and soybean acres decreases dramatically if yield even becomes possible. These interdependencies are real. We have to reduce reliance, and we have to reduce reliance with the understanding this is a global market. We have to understand that this global market that is food and agriculture, that is Agbioscience, well, there are competitors and there are customers. Right? The products that we create, the products that we grow, whether it's animals, whether it's plants, whether it's the food that comes from them, it's part of a global market. And that global market is, well, it's really challenging. This is from American Funds, a big mutual fund company. Every year they forecast what they believe will happen in the global economy. They look at early term, midterm, late term recession, and then bouncing back out. That's the wave that you see before you. We'll take a look at this. Eurozone in recession, Germany in recession, UK in recession, China in recession. All customers of what we're growing. The only two sizable economies that you see are India and the US. They're kind of the buoy for the global economy. I don't know how everybody here feels, but I don't exactly feel like the buoy of the global economy, right? Inflation is still high. We're starting to see unemployment tick up. Food prices are high. This is a real challenge. And when we operate in this world, we say, boy, we have to reduce dependency on foreign markets. We also have to realize those foreign markets, well, they're having some of their challenges of their own. We have to reduce dependency. We have to accelerate resiliency. And we have to innovate. We have to innovate for health. Lastly, we have to innovate for health. And when you think of health as part of the national security apparatus, this may be hard to see initially. The World Health Organization, just a couple of years ago, put out a big, bold goal. They wanted to reduce sodium in food. And what we saw was a lot of food companies scramble to try to answer the call, the WHO. One of those is Kraft Heinz. I mentioned I have 2 little girls at home. There's a lot of this stuff in our house, whether it's mac and cheese or ketchup. I mean, it's like gold in the Fraser household. But if you look at this, what Kraft Heinz said they would do, they would reduce sodium by 5%. That was one of their goals. And they would reduce sugar in their products by 60 million pounds. Because they realize that they have to innovate for health. The end consumer is demanding it. Now, does anybody remember the Capri Sun, the foil pack with the straw? Every time you put the straw in, it goes to the backside and gets everywhere. I think that's just me. Capri Sun, they went through the same process last year. That's a Kraft Heinz product, by the way. So Capri Sun went through the same process, reduced sugar by 40%. Innovating for health is a huge piece of how we connect to national security, and here's why. Today, the U.S., $170 billion a year on obesity, largely the product of poor diet. Now, that's not just the cost. You begin to think of the opportunity cost of those dollars, and you begin to see the real impact. We think about all the challenges in national security, all the things that need to be done. Those dollars could go somewhere else. Now, the story behind this story is one that's even more compelling. 20% of our kids are obese. 40% of Americans are obese. But here's the piece where the national security tide is undeniable. Young men and women between the ages of 17 and 24, 25% of that population can't qualify to serve in the military because they can't meet weight standards. Innovating for health is clear. We have to solve this for national security. Now, we've seen some of the services. Clearly, the Army is leading the way. Nobody, come on. Clearly, the Army is leading the way. The Army has taken an approach and said, look, we've missed our recruiting goal a bunch. And so they created a program that you go to before basic training now to get to a place where you can actually get to basic training. It's a fine fix. It's not durable. Like actually innovating for health, ensuring that those young men and women, ensuring our kids, our families are healthy and can fight and defend this great country, that's critical. So we've talked about it. We've talked about the 3 things we have to do. We have to accelerate resiliency. I think about the example from Corteva, being really focused on how do we manage those shocks in the system. You think about Alfred Lewis, right? What he said, mankind's 9 meals away from anarchy. Accelerating resiliency, innovating for resiliency, key. We have to reduce dependency. We have to reduce dependency on markets that are hostile to us. Markets like China, 70% of glyphosate production, again, in China. A critical challenge to our ability to produce row crops. And lastly, we have to innovate for health. $170 billion a year on obesity. And 25% of those that are in the key market to actually serve in the military. Friends, I would share with you this idea of national security directly connected to food security, directly connected to ag. My hope is today that you see it. My hope is today that you're leaving here with a broader view of what agriculture is in Indiana. It's a $58 billion economy, but more importantly, you're leaving here with these 3 calls to action. Collectively, the answer isn't with one of us, the answer is within all of us working together to actually go get this stuff done. No one person owns any of these things. We have to do it. I want to share with you one resource. If you're interested in what's happening in this space, every Monday morning for 20 minutes, we have a conversation. It's a podcast. It's called Agbioscience. The host is a little rough, but if you can get past that, I think you'd actually enjoy the conversation. It's now the #1 ag tech podcast in the world, which I'm pretty excited about. Top 5% of all podcasts worldwide. We'd love to have you part of it. We'd love to have you join those conversations. There's a lot happening there. In fact, I think in the pre-read or in the invite for this, there was a podcast with Senator Todd Young talking about this exact issue of food security as national security. If you haven't listened to it yet, I would encourage you to do so. My contact info is there. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, or you could just send me an email, or we could talk after. That would be fine too. I sincerely appreciate your time. I sincerely appreciate your focus. And again, for those of you that are serving in the national defense, those of you that have served in national defense, thank you. We still have a lot of work to get done, and that work is at the intersection of ag and defense. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or go out and consume some calories with you. Yeah, please.
You were talking about, there was kind of like 5 pillars that you had up there, the bioscience, animal health. But where does the land fall in? Because I didn't hear you specifically talk about land.
So land, water, air, I would put in the piece that is around all of it. It is the platform in which all of it operates. So, if you look at production agriculture, I talk about that being the cornerstone. I'll put some numbers to it. So if you look at that $58 billion economy, roughly 16 of it comes from production agriculture, critical to the land. But you can't abstract that from the food companies, because the food companies couldn't make anything if they didn't have product. Animal health, we couldn't have animal health without actually having land for those animals to be on. So I don't think you can extract it. It's part of the operating environment in which all it works.
And then kind of a follow-up on that. How important, I heard about all the big companies and stuff, but how important is our small distributed agricultural farmers? Because, with our cows, one of the things that I think makes it so resilient is your small cow herds, your small chicken flocks and things like that. But I guess one of the things I saw when you were showing the picture of the Russians, how they bombed the Ukrainian ports, rules and regulations can be just as effective as bombs. And we have spades of that here in the U.S. and what we're doing. So I think those are things we also need to be mindful of, and how we make sure that our policymakers are in tune with that, and it's just not leaning toward some of the large corporations, even though I know that's where the bulk of food comes from, but our security and resiliency, I think, really comes from that. So.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple pieces there that I'd highlight. Clearly, distributed production is important. And if you look at all of those folks that I mentioned, Corteva, Elanco, we can keep going, Vex, AgReliant, United Animal Health, the story goes on and on and on. Their customers are those producers. And so without the producers, you don't have the company, you don't have the economy. So I think there's some connection there.
Certainly.
And when you look at the operating environment, policy environment that you mentioned, absolutely. Freedom to operate is critical. And I think we collectively as a population, we're not a lobbying organization, safe harbor statement delivered. But I do believe being really intentional about predictability is critical, because if people are going to make investments, whether that's a new grain bin or whether that's a new corporate headquarters, understanding that capital is actually going to go to something that is long-term valuable and generates return is critical. That's great. Anything else? Yes, please.
Concerning dairy, some of the podcasts that you've done, are you dwelling on that?
So we have talked with a lot of different folks. I mean, so just what is today? It's Tuesday. So yesterday, this is an example.
Okay.
There's a company called Maisley in South Africa. Maisley is a company that has figured out how to make a milk-like product out of corn. And so I'm not one to say, hey, look, it's only cow's milk or it's only whatever. We should be an equal opportunity innovation platform, right? And so in that case, what got me really interested in the guys at Maisley is, okay, they're creating a product that will have market. That, I mean, they've figured out, they've raised capital, they're gonna go do some really interesting work. And the chocolate milk that they have, by the way, is really, really good.
Okay.
But when you look at Maisley, what I found through that discussion was, get these numbers slightly wrong, like 60% of Hispanics are lactose intolerant, and like 90% of Asians are lactose intolerant globally. And so finding solutions and being a place where those solutions can actually happen are really important.
Supply is needed.
Exactly right. And then you go over here and you go, okay, well, how do we drive demand for corn? Well, that looks pretty smart. And so I think finding ways, there's never going to be a silver bullet, but having this, it's like a portfolio of investments, right? You don't have all small caps and you don't have all bonds. You have a mix. And that's what we're trying to create is how do we attract them and how do we support? On the dairy front, I mean, if we're going to go directly to cow milk, as an example, Indiana has done a really good job. Dairy strategy from the Indiana State Department of Agriculture came out 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, something like that. And one of the things that we've seen since then is Walmart put a big dairy operation up in Northeast Indiana. And I think the idea that Indiana can be this place where the future of food, I'm not saying new food, but the future of food, making sure that we have this resilient economy can happen, I think we're proving that's possible.
And we can have ag for food as well as ag for energy?
Absolutely. It's such an important piece. So if we look at, let's look at ethanol as an example. So, I think everyone here knows the corn that, most of the corn we drive by in the field is not corn that we'd go out and eat. And if you did, you'd probably need to go to a dentist afterwards. I think the number is 45%, 45% of the corn grown in Indiana goes to ethanol. Fast forward, and I've some research on this from an organization called AgWeb. They look at what the future demand of ethanol is. It's not promising. When you look at this shift, and again, whether you agree with it, whether you don't agree with it, it's just what forecasters show is this demand for ethanol drops off. So we start looking at energy and we go, okay, we have all this distributed, back to the distribution piece, we have a lot of small to mid-sized ethanol producers in the state, which is really, really powerful when you begin to think through, okay, if we need to innovate and turn that ethanol into some other bioproduct, right? From a macro standpoint, how do you take corn processing, instead of turning it into ethanol, do you turn it into something else? The fact that we have that distributed network puts us in a really unique space to be able to capture market.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, please.
Kind of follow on that, there's a big push towards non-animal derived proteins for other reasons. Skip debating that. When I look at the analog of energy, and now we're starting to run on limitations around grid, right? Deliver this great idea. I see a very similar analog with animal proteins and forage production and all that. What do you see in the next 10 to 20 years the impact will be? I've traveled in the West the last 5 years a lot of these places that's nothing but forage production. You see economies are built in animal production. What do you think that'll look like? Are we going to have a repeat of the grid that may collapse?
So animal production, sort of how does this look overall? I think there's two things. We have to look at it first as a global market. Despite the challenges globally from what we saw from International Monetary Fund and sort of real GDP growth plateauing or declining, or even Capital Group's forecast on where recession is going to hit. Despite all of that, there's still a rising middle class that has, globally, a rising middle class that has a demand for protein, that is actually driving animal protein consumption. And so I think we'll see that, and I think that's going to be a trend that plays well into the next decade. I think that's a reality. I think the other thing we have to see is we look at consumer behavior. It's going to be back to the portfolio example. Right? It's not all bond, it's not all small cap, it's somewhere in between, and we have to be able to do both. I know what my choice is. It doesn't matter for this discussion, as you like T-Bone say. But I think creating an environment, creating an ecosystem that says, hey, we can support innovation. Animal health is a key piece. In fact, the animal health component that I mentioned, fastest growing category of Indiana's Agbioscience economy over the last decade. I believe that will continue in the next decade. So how do we continue to do that? Then how do we continue to find new opportunities to use corn or to use other things to create additional opportunity? When you look at alternative proteins as an example, so a lot of venture-backed interest in alternative proteins. If you look at what is required for those proteins to actually become a product, it's fermentation. And if you sort of back the chain up, what's required for fermentation is dextrose. What's dextrose made from corn? And so creating that platform, I think, is really, really important.
Maybe I didn't frame my question properly, because, when you look at power production or energy consumption, it's the same equation as food, as protein. And globally, there's an increase in that, and globally, there's an increase in use of corn to do that. In the United States, regulators have supplanted the free markets. So my question really was, when our regulators, if they do, say that we can no longer eat proteins derived from ruminants, and then from pigs, and then from chickens.
Yeah.
What does that, I'm likening that to our electric grid right now. It's
Yeah.
slowing and straining. So what does that look like for the ag economy and for our state?
Yeah, so I think that I'm going to go back to what I said over here, not a lobbying organization. I think predictability in operations is really important. Why I have confidence in that here in Indiana, you have the largest pure play ag company in the world, that's Corteva. You have the second largest independent animal health company in the world, it's Elanco. Those are not the only two on the planet, but we have a really important economy here that policymakers in our state, I can't
I'm
think
not
through
worried
what
about our
that's.
state. I'm worried about.
I think having that predictability and having the awareness of what's here. In fact, I think part of sharing this innovation story and sharing how this connection, I think for many, this story is one that's untold. This connection between national security and food security, and having these conversations, I think, are really important for policymakers to understand that a decision made on an item could potentially have impact on others. I think that's part of our job. Anything else? Other questions? Yeah, please.
Some of the recent geopolitical-ish stuff where we're concerned about overseas adversaries purchasing land. Yeah, I think years ago we had Japanese investment, in some of the pig processing facilities were maybe. So I'm just curious, looking out, will we be doing more with our allies and our adversaries continue to push back on it seems like a really good illustration of what you're speaking.
Yeah, I think the food economy is a co-opetition economy, just broadly. That's one guy's view, not necessarily that of staffing or management. I feel like I continue to give safe harbor statements, but I do believe that there are things uniquely Indiana. There are things that we can do really well. I think there are things that we're never going to grow in the near term. We're not growing bananas or kiwis here, right? So I think we realize there's this global economy. I think those kind of things won't change in the near term. Now, what does gene editing mean long term? What does some of those things? What does controlled environment agriculture mean? Boy, that starts to look a little different. I don't think we're going to see that the next decade. But the reality is, I do think that this is a global economy. We have to be thoughtful of it. I think there is a fine line to walk here between globalism and nationalism. We have to be pretty careful with where that is and find a way in which to navigate through that. And I think so far so good. We've done it. Still a lot more work to be done. Other questions? Yeah.
Does your work intersect with the human microbiome at all? And I know it doesn't handle it.
Yeah, I'd say so. The benefactor of would connect there. So I'll give you an example. A company called Biomedic, a company that was a spin out of Elanco, doing some really interesting work in microbiome innovation in animal health that could have application to human health over time. Yeah, please.
Just kind of wondering how you see your talent pipeline.
Oh my gosh, I love that
Right?
question. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's, we work in our regional space here,
Yeah.
the Indian uplands, and really interested to understand from your perspective.
Yeah.
What you see that talent pipeline looking like, how, what your weaknesses and pain points might be right now.
Yeah, so I mean, let's start with the big. So 155,000-ish that are employed today. I think when we look at talent, it's unique across each of the 5 subverticals I mentioned. But it's unique in the sense of it's unique to Agbioscience. I would argue not terribly unique to the economy in volume. Here's what I mean. So in value-added food nutrition, the bulk of those jobs on account basis are manufacturing jobs. So finding advanced manufacturing talent, whether it's for a food company or whether it's for another company, different but similar, right? So similar challenges. When we look at advanced degrees in food, advanced degrees in animal health, advanced degrees in plant science, I mean, those are master's, PhD level. It's similar challenges we see across the economy. What I think is unique to Agbioscience specifically is most students, and I'm going to take this to the student level, aren't aware that if you're a finance major, you're a marketing major, you're a data scientist, or an engineering major, there's actually a job. And so part of me believes, there's a lot of people doing work in talent, a lot of people doing work in talent. I believe our unique position as Agronovus is to help inspire those activities, but to help educate, and I would argue inspire students that if you're a great data scientist, let me introduce my friends at Corteva or an Elanco or a Bex or a pick your favorite. Because if you want to be a part of this economy that actually feeds people, that is at the core of our existence, you're a data scientist, well, we got a job for you. So we created a program called Field Atlas. It's online at myfieldatlas.com. And the whole idea is to help students who, maybe they're not an agronomy student, maybe they're not a veterinary med, maybe they're not a vet nurse, maybe they're not a food biologist or a plant pathologist. They're what we call an allied industry, allied course of study. Gosh, I could do something here that enables people to eat. And it has been electric. So we actually employ students on college campuses all over the state, part-time, who serve as ambassadors for this program. So, they don't, students really don't want to hear from me. What they really want to hear is from somebody like them, right? And somebody who's sitting next to them in a class, and they can go speak at a class of what they learned. I'll share with you 2 examples that have happened from this program. So we have an ambassador today, never thought they would be in the food economy, never thought they'd be in Agbioscience. They just got back from an internship at Corteva in Puerto Rico. I have another student, never thought this would be her calling in life, has an internship with a food company in Italy this summer because of the experience she's had here. And so part of me believes that our collective responsibility is to help show students, help show young people what's possible. So I think that's part of what's missing. I think there's a lot of talent work that we can go do and create curriculum, and there are a lot of smarter people than me doing that. What I think we can uniquely do is show them what's possible and show them that there's a place for you here. So I don't think there's not one specific thing that I would say, what's the gap in the workforce? The gap in the workforce is the same challenge you see across the economy. The gap that I see in the workforce is helping people see there's a job for them here.
And I think you see a lot of students that are interested in either helping in the healthcare industries, as we see, they want to have a purpose in what they do, and a student may want to be an environmental engineer because they're interested in safety and like that, right? And
Exactly.
have a wonderful teacher here beside me that probably just leaning over this idea of what you might have.
Yeah, there's.
At an elementary level.
I think there are. My sister's an elementary teacher, and I have tried to speak into her as much as possible. myfieldatlas.com. What's really cool there is there are a lot of videos from young people, but again, aren't me, where they can see, hey, my first couple of years, this is what my career looked like, and these are the challenges and the opportunities that I faced. I think that's the onus is on all of us to help paint that picture. Let the educators do what educators do. But it's our job as an industry to say, here's what's possible. Here's the place. Okay.
She asked, what role does quality broadband play in ag tech innovation and adoption among small and medium producers in Indiana and other rural states?
My gosh, that's great. That is a great question. So connectivity, what role does connectivity play? It's really important. I mentioned I used to be a John Deere dealer. The effluent of data from a tractor, the amount of data that comes from a production system is mind-blowing. I mean, absolutely mind-blowing. Being able to actually use that data requires connectivity. Being able to bring it in, like in John Deere, being able to bring it into the operations center, which is a web-based platform, absolutely critical. I think the next step of that connectivity of where there's value is when we start looking at where does that crop go. Being able to identify what's happened from day one of that field to harvest of that field, all the data that's associated with it is actually the proof of the value of that crop. We're seeing some gains. I mean, you look at what John Deere inked a deal earlier this year with Starlink to specifically South America, but we're starting to see cases, made another announcement on another satellite provider, where if cellular connectivity isn't there, you could use satellite. And I think we're going to see more and more of that innovation happen. But it's undeniable, the role that connectivity has played, that will play, and will continue to play in the future. Across from food to animal health, plant science to ag tech, connectivity is required for all of it. Other questions? Yeah, please.
Are you connected to the Future Farmers America?
I am. So not too far from us. In fact, a lot of our ambassadors have had experience in it.
Might be appropriate for the uplands.
That's right. That's exactly right. And we're pretty close to their headquarters, not too far away, which is another benefit of the great state of Indiana. Other questions?
Kind of related to workforce, any anecdotal or just information about as school budgets get tighter, you read some stories where the ag curriculum seems to fall out. How are we doing in that?
Yeah, I'd say I'm starting to see ag programs come back, and now this could be confirmation bias because no one wants to tell me when they leave, but they want to probably tell me when they come. I think about my little town that I live in, just north of Indianapolis, and they just relaunched an FFA program, an ag program, which I think is fantastic. One of the things that I think we in ag are challenged with, just in general, is we talk about it as ag because we're proud of it and it's important. When you take the ag conversation and talk about food, it becomes far more relatable to those that aren't in it, right? And so when you start talking about ag as part of the food system, then people go, oh, yeah, I eat 3 times a day or maybe more. I think that becomes this connectivity that we have an opportunity to help create back to sort of workforces. How do you help people see their place? I think how do you make it relevant? If you're a suburban school or you're a school that maybe doesn't have a lot of production ag around, you may not think that it's relevant. But when you begin to see that what's deep science and plant science, it's deep science and animal health, it's STEM by definition across all 5 of those subverticals, and it's food, and you are in it every day, and it's the only economy that touches every person on the planet, that's a hard case not to be excited about. And I think we're starting to see that come back in schools. Other questions? Yeah, please.
You mentioned the Roundup risk.
Mhm.
What would you say is the next risk coming on? Do you have another risk?
Yeah, that's where we have reliance on others. And one of the things that we're working on right now is there is this gap. So when you look at it across plant science, you could look at it across animal health, really anything that has bioprocessing to it. Fuels to a lesser degree, but where you're taking a commodity, you're doing some processing to it, and you're creating could be an industrial chemical, could be a food product, could be something on the other end. There's this gap that exists today in the US at broad scale between flask and commercial size. And so there's an organization that was founded in 21 by the Department of Defense, one of their institutes. It's called Biomade. It's headquartered in Minnesota. They've shortlisted Indiana as one of 6 states they're looking at investing in a facility that would sort of bridge that gap. So today what happens, and why I think it fits into the the reliance on other countries. Today you have to go somewhere else. You typically have to leave the U.S. to go take it from flask to full scale, which just creates risk. It creates risk on two fronts. It creates risk from a national security standpoint, clearly. I think it also creates risk economically long term of where does that innovation ultimately go and where does the scale happen, where are the jobs created, where is the economic sort of effluent from it. So we're working on it, but I'd say that's, in my mind, that's the next sort of very tangible, real-term target is solving that bio-innovation gap that exists between flask and full scale. Yeah, for sure. Other questions? Turn it back to you.
I think so.
Okay.
Sorry, you should have got this one time.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, my God. Let's give Mitch a hand for that. Thank you very much for coming. You came from West Lafayette. Is that where you actually?
Just north of Indy. Yeah.
North of Indy.
Yeah.
So thank you for driving down
Of course.
this way. So little unique topic, obviously, for what we typically do. I mean, we've seen the growth in microelectronics and hypersonics and have concentrated on that for a while. But when I spoke to him for the first time about this, my thought was, what kind of audience are we going to get here? And he just like he spoke to you today is how he spoke to me then. And I mean, it was like he could read an instruction manual, and I probably would be listening to him. He's a great speaker. Doesn't have to do anything. So thank you very much for doing that. So I think we all have seen what the connectivity point is. He brought a lot of points, especially in the Innovate Health part, to think about the services not allowing a large percentage of people in because they're not with the weight standards. I mean, no one can serve our country if they obviously cannot get in. So that affects us here tremendously in the work that is being done on base. So thank you for making that connection point for us. So if you want to know any of the other events that we're doing, you can go on the westgateacademy.com site and see what we're doing. In June, we won't have one let's see, we're in May, right? So June, we're actually going to have ARI, who won the Microelectronics Hub, the Commons Hub, right? Any Commons?
Mm-hmm.
They're upstairs. They just finished the space up there, or in the midst of finishing, approximately 7,000 square foot. Beautiful area. It actually has been unfinished since the day this building opened in 2012. So we're very happy to see what we thought in 2012 is actually happening in 2024. So we will actually be, I'm speaking to them this week, but they will be talking about kind of an update of what they're doing, and it'll be upstairs whenever we do that. At least that's the plan as of right now, to do upstairs. So welcome to come in June. We will not have one in July, and then we'll move forward. Also want to mention that this may not be something for everybody here, but obviously we've done the First Tuesday event since 2017. So we've done this for quite a while, and I think it's been really successful. So I think it's brought a lot of people together. I think there's been a lot of discussions that I've had with multiple different people, companies, as well as there's been a lot of coworkers that have been added here, leased tenants that have been added here, and within the tech park. So, but we're going to try to move into something. We're going to keep this, of course, but we're going to try to move into a summer intern programming event. And again, this may not be for everybody, and some of you may already be aware of it. But just as he was saying in terms of pipeline, people have to feel comfortable with where they are, who they're working with, kind of the area that they're from. We know that there is at least 203 summer interns that will be coming within the tech park in Crane. That's not everybody. That is ones that have reached out to us and told us that they have this. Now, Crane has 100, 150, I think is what it is. NSWC does, so that's quite a big difference. But we obviously want them to stay here. We want to try and figure out a way that we can have engagements for them to come and learn about Crane, learn about how to apply for other jobs within the defense industry. What are housing opportunities here? What are the fun things that are within each county around here, recreational, that they can do? So starting next Thursday, actually, May 16th, we're going to be doing every other Thursday till August 8th. And if you need more information, if you haven't been a part of those discussions, I apologize. Please let me know. We'll get you more information. But for instance, the first one will be ROI will be speaking about kind of the study that they have done in the workforce and what the future is supposed to be going towards. I'll be speaking a little bit just on the overview and the intent of the programming itself. It is not a summer intern program, it's programming. So it's meant for them to get acclimated. Also within the pipeline of different dates is the commander of NSWC Crane and NSA, and also Colonel Taylor with the CAAA, the Army, will be having a panel and kind of talk about their roles on base and the overview of Crane. So these people will be coming from everywhere. So we want them to stay within this area. So we want to make sure that we're getting them acclimated and understanding the environment in the region here. So just to let you know that we'll be doing that. It'll be similar format, only it'll be a different time change. It'll be from the 3 to 5 time frame. And again, let us know if you want more information on it. Anybody's more than welcome to come, but just wanted to provide that information. So now that we've spoken about food a lot, and I can't say this is under the Innovate Health options, but it's helping the economy, so we can do that. So we'll go out to the lobby and enjoy some more refreshments, and absolutely speak to Mitch a little more about that. So thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Mitch.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.